Welcome to CP Newsroom. I'm Nicole Menzi. Joining us today is Brent Storms, President and CEO of Orchard Group, a church planting network located here in New York City. Brent has been in the church planting business for over a decade, having helped hundreds of pastors plant new faith communities. What kind of sacrifices, planning, budgeting goes into building a Christian community from the ground up? And can starting new faith communities save the Christian church in America? Hi, Brent. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
All right. So first off, can you break down a little bit, what is church planting?
Every church that exists in America or any other place in the world was started at one point. So a lot of times people see a building and they think it's always been there. But somebody had to envision that church being started. A lot of times it begins with a dream of a leader, and they rally other people together. Maybe they meet in a home, and eventually they start to gather as a church. And so we do whatever we can to make it possible for those leaders who have a dream to start a new church to get the resourcing they need, the funding, whatever it takes to get that church started.
Okay, and so go into some of those intricacies for a bit. Planning, budgeting, and sometimes it takes years for a church plant to get off the ground, so to speak.
Right. Nobody does this alone. So even if a leader has a dream for a church that they want to see started in their community, it's going to take a lot of people, volunteers that join them. It's going to take financial partners to support the work. And so some of what we do with Orchard Group is to develop a business plan for a new church, because in our country anyway, there's a lot of legal implications. So you have to be incorporated, you have to become a 501c3 organization. You typically are going to have a pastor who's paid, and so there's payroll issues and accounting issues. And so what we do is provide a lot of the support behind the scenes to make it possible for a leader to focus purely on the ministry, focus on the people, and focus on serving the community.
Okay, and cities have a prominent presence in the Bible, right?
Right.
So what's the significance for the city in church planting?
So significance, I think, would be the key word, or influence. So you do see that when the Apostle Paul wanted to start sharing the gospel, he was very focused on going to cities.
Right.
The other apostles started to spread around and start churches in cities, partly because of the cultural influence that could happen, partly because of just population density. If you want to reach a lot of people, you go where the people are.
Right, exactly.
And I believe that's true still today, as people more and more are moving to cities, and you see statistics that indicate that in the future, 70% of the population, or whatever the numbers might be, they're projections, of course, but that a more significant percentage of the population overall will live in cities. And I think it's important for the church to take that seriously.
Okay, and of course, there's stereotypes, I guess, about urban centers in the city and whatnot. But, there's an oft reference, I believe, passage, Jeremiah 29:7, where God tells the Jewish exiles in ancient times to embrace this new, strange city that's pretty much enslaved them.
Right.
But he says, pray for the city because their well-being is your well-being. How does that speak to us today in terms of thinking positively about where we are, even not in a city, but the community where we've been planted?
Right. Just the word exile has a negative connotation for obvious reasons.
Right.
The people of Israel were exiled from their home to go live in a foreign land, and so that's where we get that concept. And there is a sense in which that's true for us today, especially in America, where the church had maybe over the last several generations its greatest strength in rural or small town or suburban contexts, and not as much strength in a city environment. And so when we're Christians living in the city, I think sometimes it does feel like we're living in exile. So your passage, I think, is really relevant for us today. I do think we want to think about starting churches that are going to make the city better for everyone. And I can give some really specific examples of this. Like one of our new churches in Brooklyn works with an organization called Brooklyn Community Services that provides legal help, job training to people who don't have access to that. And that's a great way of helping and serving the community.
And to touch on that a bit, that's one of the big issues I've noticed that also comes up when you want to speak to maybe the negative aspects of church planting.
Right.
And even resentment from churches, let's say, who've been in the community for a long time.
Right.
And they see a new pastor comes in and it's like, oh, what are you going to do that's different?
Right.
Or they feel neglected and ignored because they're not brought in and they have the biggest information about their community.
Right.
So talk about that a little bit.
No, that's great. I mean, ideally, a person who comes to the community is going to come with a posture of humility. They're going to come with a posture of learning and listening. You know, Jesus told the parable, he said, don't take the seat at the head of the table, take the seat at the lower end of the table, and then eventually you're going to be invited up. And so we want our leaders to enter their cities with that posture and listen and learn and serve until they're credible. And so I think new churches can be started in ways that are good even for existing churches. New churches are often pioneering. They attempt things that maybe established churches aren't willing to attempt.
Yeah, they don't want to lose
They push
who
the
they do
boundaries
have.
a little bit, and then
Right.
the established churches learn from those new churches and adopt some of those things. And so some people would even say, and there may be some statistical evidence to point to this, that new churches raise the bar for all the churches in a community.
Okay, and final question, that point about, religion or Christianity perhaps being on the decline in the U.S., how do planting new faith communities, how does that kind of address that issue?
Yeah, well, I think there are a lot of people that would say that starting new churches is one of the most effective evangelistic tools that we have. When you start a new community, it does not have from its very beginning a sense of being a belonging to some people and therefore not belonging to others. And so for a person who may be seeking or searching or even willing to accept the invitation of a friend to come to a church, there are fewer sort of social barriers to entering and becoming part of a new church community. And so I think it is a tool. It may not be the only tool
Right, of course.
that is going to make the difference. We happen to be in the work of starting new churches, so we think it's very important, but I think it's one of the things that God can use to help us reach our country and hopefully the world.
All right, thank you very much, Brent Storms, President and CEO of Orchard Group, for touching on this very important topic, perhaps one of the key ways in which we can speak to the lack of faith in America.
You're welcome. Glad to be here.
All right, and thank you for tuning in. See you next time.